Hey everyone, please stick to the video till end as number 2 and 1 will amaze you. Let's start. 5. Air Canada Flight 767, the Gimli Glider. The story of Air Canada Flight 767, also famously known as the Gimli Glider, is a remarkable tale of human ingenuity, perseverance, and aviation excellence. What began as a routine flight on July 23, 1983, turned into an extraordinary emergency landing that has since become one of the most astonishing incidents in aviation history. Over time, the events surrounding this flight have gained a reputation not only for the miraculous survival of everyone on board but also for the eerie experiences and rumors that followed. The aircraft at the center of this story was a Boeing 767, which had been newly introduced by Air Canada in the early 1980s. This jet was part of the airline's transition to a more modern fleet, as it offered better fuel efficiency and improved avionics. The particular aircraft used for Flight 143, as it was originally designated, was a sleek, state-of-the-art machine. At the time of the incident, the aircraft had been in service for only a few months. The Boeing 767 was designed to be one of the most advanced aircraft of its time, featuring a two-man cockpit, a computerized flight management system, and a more streamlined design that made it lighter and more fuel-efficient than earlier models. Air Canada had high hopes for the Boeing 767, believing that this aircraft would bring the airline into the next era of commercial flight. However, a minor yet critical issue would set the stage for the now famous Gimli Glider incident. At the time, Air Canada was transitioning from imperial units of measurement, pounds and gallons, to the metric system, kilograms and liters, for its fuel calculations. This seemingly small change would have a huge impact, leading to one of the most dramatic emergency landings in aviation history. The day of the incident, July 23, 1983. Air Canada Flight 143 was scheduled to fly from Montreal to Edmonton with a stop in Ottawa. On that summer day in 1983, Captain Robert Pearson and First Officer Maurice Quintal were in command of the Boeing 767. The flight seemed routine as the plane took off from Montreal, but a miscalculation in the fuel load would soon turn this into anything but a typical flight. Shortly after departing from Ottawa, while cruising at 41,000 feet, the crew noticed a problem, an unexpected warning from the aircraft's fuel gauges. At first, the crew believed it was a minor electrical issue. However, as the flight progressed, the situation worsened. The fuel gauges were showing dangerously low fuel levels, even though the crew had calculated that there should be enough for the journey. Then, suddenly, disaster struck. The Boeing 767 experienced a complete loss of engine power. Both engines had failed, something that was virtually unheard of in modern commercial aviation. The cause? The aircraft had run out of fuel. The cockpit of the plane went eerily silent as the engines shut down. In that moment, Flight 143 transformed into an unpowered glider, plummeting towards the Earth at a high speed. The Boeing 767 was designed to glide well, even without engines, but this was an unprecedented situation. What followed was a remarkable display of skill, quick thinking, and teamwork. Captain Pearson, who had previous experience flying gliders, immediately took control of the situation. He realized that he would need to glide the plane as far as possible and make an emergency landing. First Officer Quintal suggested an abandoned military base in Gimli, Manitoba as a possible landing site. The challenge, however, was immense. Without engines, the plane lost altitude rapidly. The aircraft systems were severely limited, and the crew had to manually extend the landing gear, which only partially deployed. But with incredible precision, Captain Pearson brought the massive aircraft down, landing it on a makeshift runway at Gimli. Unbeknownst to the crew, that day, the runway was being used for a go-kart race, and it was filled with people. Luckily, Pearson and Quintal were able to steer the plane away from the crowd, bringing it to a stop with no casualties. This miraculous landing earned the aircraft the nickname the Gimli Glider, and the story quickly became legendary. Following the incident, the Boeing 767 that had become the Gimli Glider was repaired and returned to service. The The crew members, especially Captain Pearson and First Officer Quintal, were hailed as heroes, praised for their quick thinking and airmanship in what was a seemingly impossible situation. The incident was thoroughly investigated, and it was determined that a series of errors, mainly stemming from the miscalculation of fuel, had led to the plane running out of fuel mid-flight. Despite the plane's damaged landing gear and other repairs needed after the emergency landing, it continued to fly for many years after the incident. The aircraft eventually became a part of aviation lore, with pilots and aviation enthusiasts marveling at how a massive Boeing 767 could glide so far and land so perfectly without engines. However, as time passed, strange stories began to surface about the plane and its eerie reputation. In the years following the Gimli Glider incident, rumors and stories began to emerge, suggesting that the aircraft might be haunted. These stories were never officially documented but passed around by pilots, crew members, and ground personnel who worked with the aircraft. Some believed that the incredible event of the emergency landing had somehow left a supernatural mark on the plane. One of the most widely circulated stories involved pilots flying the Gimli Glider on routine flights after it had been repaired. Several pilots reported hearing strange knocking sounds coming from the cockpit, even though all systems were functioning normally. The knocks were described as rhythmic and deliberate, almost as if someone, or something, was trying to communicate. Other reports from flight attendants and ground crew suggested that some people had seen shadowy figures in the cabin of the aircraft when it was parked overnight. These figures were often described as blurry or indistinct, but they seemed to move through the aisles of the plane. Several crew members even refused to work on flights involving the Gimli Glider, citing an unsettling feeling whenever they were on board. There were also reports of strange electrical malfunctions on the plane. Pilots flying the aircraft mentioned that the cockpit instruments would occasionally flicker or reset, even though the aircraft had been thoroughly checked and cleared for service. Some believed that these incidents were a result of the traumatic event the plane had gone through during its engine failure and glide. Aviation folklore is filled with stories of planes becoming haunted after experiencing near-fatal incidents. The Gimli Glider became a part of this tradition, as many believed that the plane's near crash and miraculous landing somehow left an imprint on the aircraft. Some speculated that the intense stress and emotion of that day in 1983, when passengers and crew were sure they would perish, had left a kind of psychic energy on the plane. Others theorized that the Gimli Glider might be haunted by a spirit connected to Gimli itself, perhaps from the time the airstrip had been used as a military base. Could it be that the plane's emergency landing had disturbed something long dormant? Despite the haunting rumors, most pilots who flew the aircraft after the incident did not experience anything unusual. Some dismissed the stories as the product of nervous imaginations, fueled by the plane's already legendary status. However, for those who did experience strange occurrences, the Gimli Glider took on an almost mythic quality, an aircraft that had defied the odds and, perhaps, crossed into the supernatural. After its famous emergency landing, the Gimli Glider continued to fly for over 2 decades. Despite the haunting rumors, it remained a fully functional and reliable aircraft. However, in 2008, after nearly 25 years of service, Air Canada retired the plane. The Gimli Glider made its final flight to the Mojave Desert, where it was placed in long-term storage, eventually being dismantled for parts. Though the aircraft is no longer flying, the story of Flight 143 lives on as one of the most incredible aviation tales in history. The name Gimli Glider has become synonymous with skill, bravery, and a bit of luck. The haunting rumors, while never officially substantiated, continue to add an eerie dimension to this already fascinating story. The incident had a lasting impact on both Air Canada and the aviation industry as a whole. After the emergency landing, rigorous changes were implemented to ensure that a miscalculation like this could never happen again. The airline revisited its fuel measurement practices, and procedures for handling dual-engine failure were revisited across the aviation world. The quick-thinking actions of Captain Pearson and First Officer Quintal became a textbook example of how human skill and training can prevail even in the most dire of situations. Pilots began receiving more training on handling engine failures and gliding techniques, inspired by the extraordinary events of that day in 1983. The story of Flight 143 also sparked increased attention on the importance of clear communication between ground crew and flight crew, particularly when transitioning systems, as Air Canada had been doing with the metric system. This incident served as a sobering reminder of how small errors can have massive consequences and reinforced the value of thorough checks and communication in the aviation industry. While the tangible lessons from the Gimli Glider are well documented, the whispers of the supernatural that followed the aircraft's career are harder to explain. For some, the idea of a plane becoming haunted seems absurd. How could a mechanical object hold on to spiritual energy or emotions from a past event? And yet, countless stories of haunted ships, houses, and yes, even planes, have persisted throughout history. In the case of the Gimli Glider, some believe the incredible amount of fear, tension, and relief experienced by everyone on board left an indelible mark on the aircraft. Others speculate that the landing at Gimli, an airstrip steeped in history, may have contributed to the plane's haunted reputation. Though there are no concrete explanations for the strange experiences of those who flew on the Gimli Glider after the incident, the combination of a near-catastrophic event and the subsequent odd occurrences certainly fuel the imagination. Perhaps it is human nature to connect eerie events to places or objects where extraordinary things have happened. Even though the Gimli Glider was eventually dismantled, the story of Flight 143 remains an iconic part of aviation history. The aircraft's legacy has been immortalized in numerous documentaries, books, and even a made-for-TV movie. It continues to be a symbol of hope, resilience, and the belief that with the right training, even the most unlikely of outcomes can be achieved. For those who believe in the paranormal, the rumors of haunting and unexplained phenomena add a layer of mystique to the story. Whether or not these rumors are true, they have become a part of the aircraft's legend, transforming the Gimli Glider into more than just a technical feat. It is now also a subject of ghost stories and whispers in the aviation community. 4. Eastern Airlines Flight 401, Apparitions on the Lockheed L-1011 Tristar. On December 29, 1972, Eastern Airlines Flight 401 crashed into the Florida Everglades, resulting in one of the deadliest aviation disasters in U.S. history. Of the 176 passengers and crew on board, 101 people lost their lives, including Captain Robert Loft and Second Officer, Flight Engineer, Donald Repo. The aircraft, a Lockheed L-1011 Tristar, had been en route from New York's John F. Kennedy International Airport to Miami International Airport when a sequence of technical errors and human factors led to the crash. The tragedy of Flight 401 has since become infamous not only for the scale of the disaster but for the haunting legends that followed. Tales of ghostly apparitions and supernatural encounters aboard other Lockheed L-1011 Tristar aircraft soon began to emerge. These stories would later be referred to as the ghosts of Flight 401, apparitions of the deceased crew members, particularly Captain Loft and Engineer Repo, said to appear to other Eastern Airlines personnel and passengers on various flights. Eastern Airlines Flight 401, a Lockheed L-1011 Tristar, was one of the most technologically advanced aircraft of its time. The Tristar was a wide-bodied jet, renowned for its sophisticated autopilot system and reliability. The plane was part of Eastern Airlines' flagship fleet, and Flight 401 was a routine route between New York and Miami. On the evening of December 29, 1972, Flight 401 was operating normally as it departed from JFK at 9:20 p.m. The crew consisted of Captain Robert Loft, First Officer Albert Stockstill, and Second Officer Donald Repo. There were 163 passengers on board, all looking forward to arriving in the warm climate of Miami. As the flight approached Miami International Airport, the crew was preparing for landing. However, when they lowered the landing gear, the green indicator light that confirms the gear is properly engaged did not illuminate. This led to the crew being concerned about whether the landing gear was down. While the plane was placed on autopilot, the crew focused on resolving the issue. Unfortunately, in the confusion and distraction, none of the crew realized that the autopilot had accidentally been disengaged. As a result, the aircraft began a slow descent, unnoticed by the crew, who were preoccupied with the faulty indicator light. By the time they realized their altitude was too low, it was too late. The plane crashed into the Florida Everglades at around 11:42 p.m. The crash of Flight 401 was devastating. The dark waters of the Everglades and the remote location of the crash made rescue efforts extremely difficult. Despite the chaos, 75 people miraculously survived, thanks to the quick actions of rescuers and the fact that parts of the aircraft remained relatively intact. Among the survivors were some flight attendants, passengers, and stewardesses Beverly Raposa and Mercedes Ruiz, who heroically helped many passengers escape the wreckage. The cause of the crash was later attributed to pilot error, with the distraction caused by the faulty landing gear light being the central issue. It was one of the first major accidents to highlight the dangers of cockpit distractions and the importance of maintaining situational awareness, even when dealing with technical problems. The haunting stories of Flight 401 began shortly after the disaster. Over time, a number of crew members and passengers aboard other Eastern Airlines flights reported encountering the ghosts of Captain Loft and flight engineer Repo. These sightings were primarily reported on other Lockheed L-1011 Tristar aircraft, particularly those that had been fitted with parts salvaged from the wreckage of Flight 401. One of the earliest and most famous sightings involved a senior flight attendant who reported seeing Captain Robert Loft sitting in a first-class seat on a flight to Miami. The attendant, unaware of who he was at the time, tried to speak to him, but he didn't respond. The man vanished before her eyes. It wasn't until later that she recognized his face in a photograph of the Flight 401 crew. Another eerie encounter occurred when a second officer reported seeing Donald Repo on the flight deck during a pre-flight check. Repo allegedly warned the officer that there was something wrong with the aircraft. The officer checked the plane and discovered a serious mechanical issue that could have led to disaster had it gone unnoticed. This encounter became a recurring theme, Repo's ghost appearing to warn crew members of potential mechanical failures, almost as if he were continuing his duty in the afterlife. There were also multiple reports of ghostly sightings in the galley of the aircraft. Flight attendants claimed to have seen Donald Repo's face materialize in the galley ovens or to have felt his presence behind them, only to turn around and find no one there. Some described hearing strange whispers or footsteps in the empty galley when no one else was around. Passenger experiences. It wasn't just crew members who witnessed these apparitions. Several passengers on different flights also reported seeing strange figures, particularly of a man in a pilot's uniform. Some passengers claimed to have conversations with these figures, only to later discover that no such person was ever on the flight manifest. One particularly unnerving story involved a passenger who was seated next to a silent man in a uniform throughout the flight. When the plane landed, the man disappeared without a trace. The passenger later identified the figure as Captain Loft after seeing his photo in a newspaper article about the crash. As the stories of the haunting spread, Eastern Airlines attempted to suppress the rumors, fearing it would tarnish the airline's reputation. Crew members were reportedly warned not to speak about their ghostly encounters or face disciplinary action. However, the sheer number of sightings made it difficult to keep the stories contained, and the tales continued to surface. It was later revealed that salvaged parts from Flight 401 had been installed on other L-1011 aircraft in the Eastern Fleet. This fact became a significant part of the legend, with many believing that the ghosts of Captain Loft and Engineer Repo were somehow tied to these parts, particularly those in the cockpit and the galley. Over time, as these haunted planes were decommissioned or had the salvaged parts removed, the frequency of sightings diminished. However, the stories left a lasting impact, becoming one of the most famous ghost stories in aviation history. Captain Loft in the passenger cabin. One of the most repeated sightings was of Captain Loft sitting quietly among passengers, often in first class or business class sections. Witnesses described him as calm, almost peaceful, and yet unresponsive. His apparition would vanish suddenly, often leaving the witness deeply unsettled. The engineer's warning: Donald Repo's ghost was most frequently seen in the cockpit or galley. His spectral figure was known to offer warnings about mechanical issues, and in some cases, his appearances were credited with preventing accidents. Some flight engineers claimed to hear his voice giving them technical advice. The vanishing crew: another disturbing incident involved an entire flight crew seeing Captain Loft on board during a routine pre-flight check. All the crew members were startled, and after the figure disappeared, they decided to ground the plane and inspect it. A significant mechanical fault was discovered, which could have resulted in another tragic accident. The ghosts of Flight 401 sparked numerous rumors and theories over the years. Some believed that the spirits of Captain Loft and Donald Repo were lingering because they had unfinished business, either to warn others of danger or because they had perished in such a violent, unexpected manner. Another theory revolves around the salvaged parts. Many believe that these parts carried an energy or spiritual connection to the crew members who had died. In certain cultures, it is believed that objects connected to the deceased can hold on to their essence or even trap their souls. Eastern Airlines eventually removed all the salvaged parts from its L-1011 fleet, but the stories of ghostly encounters continued to circulate for years after. The case of Flight 401 has even inspired books, television specials, and movies, solidifying its place in both aviation and paranormal history. 3. British European Airways Flight 548, the Trident Crash Ghost. On June 18, 1972, British European Airways, BEA, Flight 548, a Hawker Siddeley Trident 1C aircraft, was involved in a catastrophic crash shortly after taking off from London Heathrow Airport. All 118 passengers and crew on board perished, making it one of the worst disasters in British aviation history. This tragic event, now often referred to as the Staines Air disaster, deeply affected the community, the aviation industry, and those who had connections to the flight. In the years following the crash, numerous eerie tales began to circulate, stories of ghostly encounters and hauntings tied to the crash site and the surrounding area. The aircraft involved in the disaster was a Hawker Siddeley Trident 1C, a British-designed, narrow-bodied jet airliner. At the time, the Trident was known for its advanced avionics and was widely used for short to medium-haul flights. BEA, a prominent airline in the United Kingdom, operated a large fleet of these aircraft. Flight 548 was a routine flight that day, set to travel from London Heathrow Airport to Brussels Airport in Belgium. This was a very common route, and no one could have predicted the tragedy that was about to unfold. On the afternoon of June 18, 1972, the flight was scheduled to depart at 4 p.m. The aircraft was fully loaded, carrying 112 passengers and 6 crew members. The captain in charge of the flight was Captain Stanley Key, an experienced pilot with years of flying under his belt. However, despite his extensive experience, the events that would unfold on that day were a result of a series of missteps and unfortunate circumstances. As Flight 548 taxied out to the runway at Heathrow, everything seemed normal. However, once airborne, the aircraft experienced technical issues and difficulties related to its takeoff configuration. Reports later revealed that the leading-edge devices, designed to provide lift at low speeds, were not properly extended, and the aircraft entered into a dangerously low speed. At around 4:08 p.m., just 3 minutes after takeoff, the aircraft suddenly stalled. In an attempt to regain control, Captain Key tried to push the plane's nose down, but the recovery came too late. The aircraft rapidly descended and crashed into a field near the town of Staines, just a few miles from Heathrow Airport. Upon impact, the aircraft disintegrated, leaving behind a fiery wreck and little chance for anyone on board to survive. All 118 lives were lost. The crash of BEA Flight 548 was a massive blow to the UK's aviation community. The investigation that followed revealed the cause of the accident to be a combination of pilot error and miscommunication. It was discovered that there was tension in the cockpit between Captain Key and his co-pilot, which led to mismanagement during takeoff. Additionally, the poor coordination of the aircraft systems during takeoff played a major role in the disaster. The tragedy was not only a technical failure but also a personal one, with a history of interpersonal conflicts between the crew members. This aspect of the crash made the story even more poignant, as it highlighted how human error and breakdowns in communication can lead to devastating consequences. The field where the crash occurred became a place of mourning for the families of the victims. However, in the years that followed, strange occurrences and ghostly sightings began to be reported at the crash site and in the surrounding area. As with many tragedies of this magnitude, stories of hauntings and ghostly encounters started to surface not long after the crash. The locals living near the crash site in Staines and the surrounding areas began reporting strange and unexplained events. One of the most chilling stories involves ghostly apparitions seen in the field where the plane went down. Several people have claimed to see figures walking around the crash site late at night. These figures are often described as shadowy, appearing in old-fashioned clothing typical of the 1970s. Some say that the apparitions seem confused or lost, as though they are searching for something. What makes these sightings even more eerie is the fact that these figures have been seen during moments of extreme quiet, sometimes accompanied by an overwhelming sense of sadness or unease. Witnesses have reported that the air around the crash site feels cold even on warm nights, and those who walk through the field often describe a sense of being watched. There are also stories of a ghostly passenger seen at London Heathrow Airport, specifically at the gates where Flight 548 was preparing to depart. Airport workers have reported seeing a lone man sitting at the departure gate for the Brussels flight, looking out the window. The man is often described as looking tired and wearing business attire that matches the era of the 1970s. However, when approached, this man disappears without a trace. Some believe that this is the spirit of a passenger who never made it to his destination and is still waiting for the flight that never arrived. Another frequent report involves unexplained sounds heard in the area around Staines. People who live near the crash site have claimed to hear the sound of engines revving in the distance, followed by what they describe as the sound of a crash and explosions. These sounds are particularly common on June 18, the anniversary of the disaster. Some witnesses have also reported hearing voices in the wind, calling out for help or shouting instructions, as though they are the echoes of the crew and passengers in their final moments. These auditory phenomena have been reported by multiple people over the years, leading many to believe that the spirits of those lost in the crash are still lingering, unable to find peace. The ghostly sightings and strange occurrences surrounding the crash of BEA Flight 548 have led to various rumors and speculations. Some believe that the spirits of the victims are trapped at the crash site due to the violent nature of their deaths. In aviation folklore, it is often said that those who perish in accidents where there is no chance for closure may remain in a state of unrest. There are also cultural beliefs tied to the idea of unfinished business. Many of the passengers on Flight 548 were en route to Brussels for important meetings or personal matters. Some believe that their spirits remain because they were unable to complete their journeys or accomplish what they had set out to do. Others speculate that the crash site itself may have some spiritual significance. Although there is no concrete evidence, some locals believe that the field where the plane went down may have been part of an ancient burial ground or a place with spiritual ties. This has only added to the growing sense of mystery and dread surrounding the crash site. The crash of Flight 548 had a lasting impact on the aviation industry. It prompted changes in pilot training and cockpit communication procedures, emphasizing the need for clear coordination and teamwork between crew members. The disaster also raised awareness about the importance of addressing interpersonal conflicts within flight crews to prevent such breakdowns in communication from occurring again. For the families of the victims, the memory of that day remains painful, but the haunting stories that surround the crash serve as a reminder of the tragedy. Whether these encounters are truly supernatural or simply a reflection of the deep grief and trauma associated with the disaster, they continue to captivate and disturb those who hear them. 2. Eastern Airlines Flight 401. Eastern Airlines Flight 401 was a Lockheed L-1011 Tristar that took off from New York's John F. Kennedy International Airport on the night of December 29, 1972. Its final destination was Miami International Airport. It was a routine flight with 176 passengers and crew aboard. The aircraft, a brand new Lockheed L-1011, was one of the most advanced planes of its time, equipped with state-of-the-art technology and praised for its safety. As Flight 401 approached Miami, everything appeared normal. The weather was clear, and the crew was preparing for a smooth landing. However, as the plane was on its final approach, a problem arose. The nose landing gear indicator light failed to illuminate, leading the crew to believe that the landing gear might not have been properly deployed. Concerned about this potential issue, Captain Robert Loft, First Officer Albert Stockstill, and Flight Engineer Don Repo became focused on troubleshooting the problem. In an attempt to resolve the situation, they put the plane on autopilot and began checking the landing gear status. Meanwhile, without their noticing, the plane slowly descended. The cockpit crew was so preoccupied with the landing gear light that no one realized the aircraft was losing altitude. Tragically, the plane crashed into the Florida Everglades, killing 101 people. The survivors faced not only the aftermath of the crash but also the dangers of being in the swamp, surrounded by alligators, snakes, and water. In the months and years that followed the crash of Flight 401, strange and unexplainable occurrences began to emerge. These reports mostly came from Eastern Airlines crew members and passengers flying on the same type of aircraft, the L-1011 Tristar. What made these reports even more unsettling was that some of the planes experiencing these strange incidents were said to have parts salvaged from the wreckage of Flight 401. The first reports of hauntings began with Eastern Airlines' own crew members. Pilots, flight attendants, and maintenance staff all started claiming that they had seen the ghosts of Captain Loft and Flight Engineer Don Repo. Their apparitions were said to appear on flights operating on L-1011s, particularly those with parts from the doomed flight. In one of the most famous encounters, a flight attendant claimed to have spoken with a man who appeared to be a passenger seated in the jump seat. When she tried to engage him in conversation, he said nothing but gave her a strange, distant look. The flight attendant then recognized the man as Captain Loft, who had died in the crash of Flight 401. Disturbed by the encounter, she reported the incident to the captain of her flight, who also recognized Loft and confirmed that it had indeed been his ghost. Another series of ghostly encounters involved Don Repo, the flight engineer of Flight 401. His ghost was seen on multiple occasions, often in the cockpit or avionics bay of planes that had parts from the crashed aircraft. In one chilling incident, a flight engineer was doing his pre-flight checks when he saw Repo's ghost sitting in the engineer's seat. Repo reportedly told the engineer, "There will never be another crash. We will not let it happen." The apparition then vanished. Repo's ghost seemed to take a protective role, appearing to warn crew members about mechanical issues. On one flight, Repo's ghost allegedly warned a flight crew about a faulty electrical circuit, which they later confirmed was indeed malfunctioning. Some believe that Repo was trying to prevent further accidents, perhaps making amends for the crash of Flight 401. It wasn't only crew members who experienced these ghostly apparitions. Passengers, too, began reporting strange occurrences. On one flight, a woman became concerned after speaking to a man in a flight engineer's uniform. When she pointed him out to the crew, he had disappeared. The crew later showed her a photograph of Don Repo, and she confirmed that he was the man she had seen. Passengers also reported hearing strange sounds, feeling cold drafts, and sensing a presence around them. Some even claimed to have seen ghostly figures walking down the aisles or standing near the cockpit. As these ghostly encounters continued to surface, Eastern Airlines tried to keep them under wraps. The airline was concerned about the negative publicity that might arise from reports of haunted planes, especially those with parts from Flight 401. However, the stories persisted and continued to circulate among the airline's employees and even reached the public. Eventually, Eastern Airlines began removing the salvaged parts from its planes, hoping to put an end to the strange occurrences. Over time, as these parts were taken out of service, the ghostly sightings decreased, and the legend of Flight 401 slowly faded into aviation folklore. Despite Eastern Airlines' efforts to suppress the story, the ghost of Flight 401 has become one of the most famous haunted tales in aviation history. The crash itself led to significant changes in cockpit management procedures and crew resource management, CRM, focusing on better communication and teamwork among flight crews. This was an important step in improving aviation safety and ensuring that a similar disaster wouldn't happen again. The paranormal side of the story, however, remains a mystery. Many who experienced the ghosts of Captain Loft and Don Repo firmly believe that their spirits continue to linger, perhaps driven by a sense of duty or unfinished business. The fact that these ghosts seem to appear mostly on planes with parts from Flight 401 has only fueled speculation that they were somehow tied to the wreckage of the plane. Over the years, books, documentaries, and television shows have recounted the eerie tale of the ghost of Flight 401. Some view it as a cautionary tale about aviation safety, while others see it as a testament to the mysteries of the afterlife. Whatever the truth may be, the story of Eastern Airlines Flight 401 continues to capture the imagination of those fascinated by both aviation disasters and ghostly encounters. 1. Pan Am Flight 914. Pan Am Flight 914 has become one of the most mysterious and debated topics in aviation history. According to popular legend, this plane vanished in 1955, only to reappear 37 years later in 1992, leaving many to wonder if the story was real, a hoax, or simply an urban legend. The story of Pan Am Flight 914 allegedly begins on July 2, 1955. The flight was scheduled to depart from New York City, heading to Miami, Florida. On board were 57 passengers and 6 crew members, all set for a routine journey over the east coast of the United States. The weather was reported to be calm, and the flight took off without any issues. However, shortly after takeoff, something extraordinary happened. According to the legend, the plane disappeared from radar. Air traffic controllers in New York tried to contact the flight, but all communication was lost. It was as if the plane had vanished into thin air. For weeks, search and rescue teams scoured the flight's intended path, but no wreckage or signs of the plane were ever found. Eventually, the authorities declared that Pan Am Flight 914 had crashed, and all passengers and crew members were presumed dead. Families mourned their loss, and the incident was filed away as an unsolved mystery. Here's where the legend takes an even more bizarre turn. According to the tale, on September 9, 1992, air traffic controllers in Caracas, Venezuela, noticed an unidentified aircraft suddenly appearing on their radar screens. It was as if the plane had materialized out of thin air. When the controllers contacted the plane, the pilot, Captain Miguel, responded in a panic, claiming that he was flying Pan Am Flight 914 from New York to Miami. The pilot and crew were completely unaware that 37 years had passed since their disappearance. The Venezuelan controllers, confused by the situation, asked the pilot for more information. When the pilot mentioned the flight date as July 2, 1955, they realized something was terribly wrong. Nevertheless, they instructed the plane to land safely at Caracas Airport. As the plane touched down, airport workers reportedly saw a vintage aircraft, an outdated model no longer in use. When the passengers and crew disembarked, they were said to be disoriented and confused, having no idea that decades had passed since their flight had taken off. The story suggests that the passengers still believed it was 1955. The strangest part of the legend is that shortly after landing, the plane is said to have taken off again without warning. The pilot, still in a state of panic, refused to stay on the ground and pulled the plane back into the sky. According to the story, Pan Am Flight 914 then vanished once more, disappearing from radar just as mysteriously as it had reappeared. From that day forward, no one ever saw or heard from the flight again, leaving the case of Pan Am Flight 914 as one of the most perplexing and debated mysteries in aviation folklore. The legend of Pan Am Flight 914 has given rise to various rumors and hauntings over the years. Some people believe that the plane's disappearance and reappearance suggest a supernatural element, possibly involving a time warp or a parallel dimension. Ghostly apparitions. Some paranormal enthusiasts claim that the passengers and crew of Pan Am Flight 914 may have been caught in a time loop or transported to another dimension. There have been supposed sightings of ghostly passengers and crew members at airports across the world, particularly at the Caracas airport in Venezuela. The curse of Pan Am 914. Another rumor is that the flight was cursed, leading to its disappearance. Some suggest that the plane was doomed from the start, as it may have been involved in secret government experiments related to time travel or quantum physics. These theories, while far-fetched, add to the mystique of the story. Time travel theories. A significant number of conspiracy theorists believe that Pan Am Flight 914 somehow traveled through time. According to this theory, the plane passed through a wormhole or a dimensional rift that caused it to reappear decades later. While there is no scientific evidence to support such claims, the idea of time travel continues to fascinate those intrigued by the story. Despite the captivating nature of the Pan Am Flight 914 story, most experts and researchers have determined that it is not based on fact. There are several reasons why this tale is regarded as an urban legend. Lack of official records. There are no official records of a Pan Am Flight 914 disappearing in 1955 or reappearing in 1992. Pan American World Airways, the airline commonly referred to as Pan Am, was a major international airline, and any such event would have been widely reported. However, there is no credible evidence or documentation to support the existence of this flight. Origins in tabloid media. The story of Pan Am Flight 914 first gained popularity after being published in tabloid newspapers, such as the Weekly World News, which is known for fabricating sensational stories. The paper often published exaggerated or fictional accounts of paranormal events, and this story seems to have originated in its pages. Inconsistencies in the timeline. There are numerous inconsistencies in the timeline of the story. For example, the model of the aircraft described in the legend, typically a Douglas DC-4, would not have been in regular use by 1992, especially not by a commercial airline. Additionally, there are no records of any air traffic controllers in Venezuela reporting the arrival of such a flight. Several factors have contributed to the enduring popularity of the story. The fear of the unknown. The idea of a plane disappearing and reappearing decades later plays on the human fear of the unknown. It reminds us that despite all our technological advancements, there are still mysteries that we cannot fully understand. The story of Pan Am Flight 914 resonates with those who are drawn to unexplained phenomena. Aviation mysteries. Throughout history, there have been numerous real-life aviation mysteries, such as the disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 and Amelia Earhart's final flight. These incidents remind us that air travel, while generally safe, can still be fraught with uncertainty. The legend of Pan Am Flight 914 fits into the larger narrative of unsolved aviation cases. Entertainment value. The story of Pan Am Flight 914 has been featured in various books, documentaries, and online forums, making it a popular topic among conspiracy theorists and paranormal enthusiasts. Its blend of mystery, time travel, and ghostly encounters makes it a perfect subject for storytelling. While the legend of Pan Am Flight 914 is fictional, it has nonetheless inspired a variety of incidents and encounters reported by those who claim to have had brushes with the supernatural. Ghostly pilots. Some people claim to have seen ghostly pilots in abandoned airports or near locations where Pan Am aircraft once operated. These sightings are often reported late at night, with witnesses describing shadowy figures in vintage uniforms. Haunted airports. There have been rumors of haunted airports, particularly in Caracas, where the flight supposedly landed in 1992. Some airport workers have claimed to see flickering lights or hear strange noises near runways late at night, although there is no concrete evidence to support these claims.